Welcome back. This lesson we're going to focus on the other side of the ocean, right? So the last lesson focused on Spain before contact with the Native American population, and this week we're going to address the Native American population before they came into contact with the Spanish. Now, I teach Chicano studies also, so I don't want to make this lesson too close to my other lesson, though. Because of the competencies, there's going to be some overlap. So if you took my Chicano studies, or if you're taking this class and then take my Chicano studies class, you're going to see some things that sound very similar, and they are, because it's just part of the requirements that I have to fulfill. But I do try to make both classes different, so that way you get a different experience. But just so you know, there might be a little bit of overlap, and that's it's not intentional. It's just required at times. So in the other class, I think I go into greater detail about the indigenous cultures. Here, I'm just going to go over it very general. All right. So throughout history, when we talk about the Mesoamerican people, we tend to, at least Europeans, tend to talk about them in a very kind of negative way. When we look at some of the great artifacts, particularly the pyramids, and we always say, well, it must have been aliens who built them, because these people are not capable of building these things. And if you watch the History Channel today, they tend to make that argument over and over. I wish they would stop showing all that alien stuff. But we find no, these people were very intelligent and were very capable of creating these great monuments. So a lot of our history is kind of challenging that type of mentality and that type of perspective, saying, look, our people did build these great things, right? It gets exhausting, but some people are just kind of stubborn, and some people just love aliens, I guess. We begin by looking as to the origins of Mesoamerican people. I'm sure you probably have heard about this argument as to where people from the Mesoamericas come from. So still the most kind of popular argument is that they came through the Bering Strait up through Alaska, Russia and Alaska, and migrated south and kind of dispersed throughout, the Americas from that point forward. Again, that's still debatable. It doesn't help us or hurt us. It's just an argument to show you where the origins of people might come from. And just so you also know, it's more of a side note, but horses used to be around the Americas too, but they became extinct at one time. So that's when the Europeans brought horses, many of the native people were like so surprised, like, what the hell is that? But at one time they have found evidence that horses at one time did exist in the Americas. But about 50 to about 10,000 years ago, people were traveling from Russia through Alaska down, Oregon, California, and into Mexico and so forth. And this, as they began to enter the, deeper into the Americas, they began to develop communities, right? They began to establish communities, I should say. And they're all over the Americas. Obviously, within the United States, there's communities there. But our focus is going to be Mexico. And one of the kind of early civilizations that you see in Mesoamerica is Teotihuacan, the Teotihuacan Valley. And this is where you begin, where you first begin to see the development of corn. If you ever heard of genetically modified food, well, the indigenous people of the Americas were doing that, which again is just so amazing. If you ever look at the seed of corn, it's very, very small. And to think that the native people made this into this, what we call today corn, it's just amazing how they kind of crossbred and just developed this vegetable that has become probably the most important staple, right, in our society. Everything from, right, a sugar sweetener that we use on your sodas to feed, for animals. Could be your dog, could be, cows. To just enjoying a good corn with the guy that sells them down the street, right, with mayonnaise and chile and all that kind of good stuff, right? It's our people who created that. It was a major accomplishment that happened about 7,000 years ago. But there's other goods that begin to be cultivated in the Tehuacan Valley, such as squash, tomatoes, avocados, potatoes, peppers, pumpkins. Many of these goods that are now associated with Europe, right? You know, imagine Italy without tomato. You know, that food will be disgusting. And actually, if you ever study medieval history and look at cookbooks from the medieval period, because Europe doesn't get these goods until after the Renaissance, they it's disgusting. It's some really horrible food, you know, because they don't have tomatoes and squash and peppers and all these things, right? I mean, again, think of France or Belgium without potatoes, you know, no French fries, no McDonald's, right? So it's the Americas who gives the West these great foods. Another important tribe that developed a little bit later are the Olmecs. Again, in my Chicano studies, I dig a little bit deeper into these groups. Here, I'm just giving you an overview. And the Olmecs, they're significant because they're known almost like the first major community that establishes things like language, and particularly, you know, pyramids and some of the ball games and art too. So they develop a very polytheistic religion, which means, you know, they believe in many gods. They have commerce, which business, right, allows the society to thrive. They develop some great art, which are you know, some of these kind of giant heads. The interesting thing about those heads is that they look almost a little bit African. the faces of the stone. So some people have argued that African people might have arrived in the Americas before the Europeans. And they develop a very hierarchical society that, you know, with emperors and you know, different groups below them. So, and lastly, they have the first written language in the Americas. I'm not sure if it's been deciphered yet, but there is a little cylinder that has you know, that stuff written on it that they were trying to understand, you know, back in the day when I was in college. Another kind of major group, another major group that you have is in Oaxaca. So my mom's from Oaxaca, so I happened to go there, and I went to Monte Alban. So there's up in the hill, there's this great pyramids and kind of community. Now it's like a national park type of place, but it was created by the Zapotecs, where it flourished as a great empire in the Oaxacan Valley. So again, we see these kind of great civilizations thrive in Mesoamerica, and many of them are kind of influenced by its predecessors. So they're influenced by the Olmec. So they borrow a lot from each other, everything from the gods to the art to the ball games. You'll see these things replicated in different parts of Mexico because they're influenced by them. We move over to the Mayan. The Mayans are probably some of the more, I don't say more, but just a very interesting group because of some of the great achievements. But before I get into them, around 600, about the 7th century, you have Teotihuacan. You probably have heard the name, and you see here in the picture, right, the development of these great pyramids by, I think they're by Puebla. And they had a population of 200,000 in the 6th century. So that's something you don't really see in Europe at this time. In Europe, you know, some of the biggest populations are maybe in the tens of thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands. So it just shows you the great development of community that we have here, where they're able to sustain such a vast community. I don't think Europe gets a city this big until probably until the 16th century. So, you know, in the 6th century, they're already having 200,000 people. So as I mentioned, you have the large pyramids that, you know, that they use. And the Mayans, those are the ones who are really, again, if there's a golden age, or I guess they call it the classical era, between 300 and 900. It's really the Mayans who kind of define this period because of some of the great things that they're doing. Like I said, everybody kind of borrows from everybody else. So the Aztecs actually borrow from Mayans and other groups too. But we see that they developed some great technology. I mean, everything from brain surgery to development of zero to a calendar that's much more exact than the European calendar at this time, to the development of the wheel. So they actually do know of the wheel. It's always been argued that they had no knowledge of the wheel. They did. They just didn't use it in a very practical sense. But they've actually uncovered, archaeologists have actually uncovered toys, Mayan toys, where they see the wheel. The kids played with it, so they had knowledge of this stuff. And this civilization thrived. It eventually collapsed for different reasons. And again, in Chicano studies, I go a little bit deeper than this, but I rather kind of focus on these kind of great innovations of this population. They track the stars, great astronomers, and part of it's not just because of the interest of following what's happening up in the skies, but because they need to know when to plant, right? They need to know what time of the year it is. Today, we don't worry about things like that because we have phones that tell us all this information. But for these people, it's quite important to know this stuff because it's a matter of survival. So I think I already mentioned enough intellectual ideas. Again, it is a center of great innovation, independent of Europe, right? It wasn't aliens who came down and told them these things, or Europeans who secretly came before 1492. It's them independently coming up with a lot of great innovations. The last group, and again, I'm briefly touching on them because I just want to highlight a few key points. And these are the Aztecs. It's a very kind of interesting place. You read the piece on Aslan, and that piece is very important to not only the Aztecs, but also for us Chicanos, because as you read, Aslan is located in our homeland today, right? It's in the Southwest, and it's this place of almost like of myth, where it's like a Garden of Eden. And the interesting thing is that why would the Aztecs leave Eden, right? If it's so perfect. And hopefully you got a chance to read the article on Aslan, but it highlights this notion of, greater things were supposed to happen to the Aztecs. Now, if any of this true, if it is or isn't true, it's up in the air because we really don't know, right? All these things are written after the fact. But it's a bit of a creation story, right? It kind of gives the Aztecs this idea that something better is out there for them, so they had to go discover it. As you read in the piece, it's their god, Huitzilopochtli, who tells them, go south and better things, better opportunities will arise, right? When you see the eagle perched on the cactus and all that kind of good stuff. And they arrive to a place called Tenochtitlan that becomes their capital. Now, there's a whole history there, and I won't dig too deep into it, but they basically live in this small island in a lake in what is today Mexico City. And they kind of develop it. They built it out, if you will, and they make it into a great civilization. And Tenochtitlan, at this time, it's like looking at the Emerald City. It's that amazing. Imagine when Cortés arrived in Tenochtitlan, to Tenochtitlan, he must have been, he might have pooped his pants because, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is here. And he actually says, this is like being in Europe. It's like being in Venice or Seville. That's how amazing it is to be in Tenochtitlan. It's a clean city. It has an aqueduct, so they actually built an aqueduct to bring water, because the water from the lake is very salty. So they actually built an aqueduct to bring water from the fountains into the city. So it's almost like a Roman Empire, if you will, right? The city's actually clean. They pick up the trash on a regular basis. They have flowers. They have zoos. It's just an amazing place. And again, no aliens came down to build any of this stuff. But this just kind of just showcases the innovation of our people. For many Chicanos, we were always told that, you know, these people were barbaric. They were what do you call it, cannibals, right? They just like to kill. And when we look at the history of these regions, we find that no, there's more. As the story of Aslan kind of showcases, right, this kind of flora fauna kind of literature that they have, that has a respect for nature. And that's something that we see with these great civilizations that we've been talking about here briefly. All right, so we'll stop it there. There's a city of Tenochtitlan. The city, it's really small. It's actually quite a swampy city, and then the Aztecs kind of built it into a massive city. I think it has like 250,000 people, and some estimates go up to 400,000. Again, you're the biggest European city at the same time that the Aztecs are around. I think it's London with like 80,000 people. So what do we learn? Number one, we find how the Americas has been inhabited for generations, right? Again, we just don't have the luxury to go through every group, but you know, people are populating not only the Americas as in the United States, but also Mesoamerica, but deeper, right? Down in Peru and other parts, right, of Latin America, you have great civilizations there too. And we find that these civilizations are highly developed, right? They're the things of wonder where it challenges that notion. I mean, you have to understand that up to like 60 years ago, they were making these claims that these people were uncivilized, some people. And we find that no, when we look at our history, they have a beautiful language in Nawa, obviously a great city. And all of this is developed without the help of anybody, right? So we'll stop it there. The next lesson that we look at will be when these two groups come together, the Spanish and the Aztecs, and we'll pick it up then. All right, so we'll end it here.